Welcome to the Assessments New User Webinar Part 2, a deep dive on data for Jump Math teachers. My name is Dawn Peterson, and I'm going to host our webinar today. I'll introduce myself a little bit more in just a few minutes. Some webinar etiquette. Please leave your microphone on mute. As you just heard, we are recording our webinar today for others to view. So please leave the microphone off so we don't have any background noise. You can choose to have your video on or off, whatever you're comfortable with. And please use the chat in the middle of your Zoom screen to post any questions, any wonderings. If you'd like to see anything demoed again, we're happy to do that for you today. For anyone who registered for this session, you will receive a follow-up email with a copy of the slide deck and a video recording sometime tomorrow morning. So any of the links that I reference or anything like that, you'll have access to in the morning, or you can request that information in the chat as well. The goal of today is that participants will learn how to maximize ASSISTments data to support student learning using the Jump Math curricula. We're going to start off with a quick introduction, an overview of ASSISTments, and then a quick part 1 recap. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. Last session, we talked about getting started, how to assign content, what the student perspective looks like. So I'll be doing a quick recap of that, but we definitely recommend checking out part 1 if you haven't viewed that yet. We're going to move on to analyzing ASSISTments data. So you'll get to see what the ASSISTments data report looks like, and I'll walk you through those details. We're going to move on to using data to inform instruction and discuss with students, where I'll walk you through some different Jump Math data scenarios and what you could do with that information to drive your instruction in your classroom. And then we're going to follow up with wrap up and next steps. So again, my name is Dawn Peterson. I'm the Director of Content and Partnerships at the ASSISTments Foundation. I was a math teacher in my former life. I taught 8th grade math for 14 years, and I actually stumbled upon ASSISTments because it was local to where I was teaching, and I used it with my students for 10 years. So data-driven instruction is really in my heart, and I'm so happy to be able to share this with you today. And I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Moy.
Hey everyone. Sorry, I was trying to find my mute button here. My name is Carrie Moy. Like Dawn said, I'm the program associate here at ASSISTments, and prior to this role, I was a middle school math teacher. And my favorite subjects to teach were proportions and systems of equations. So I taught 7th and 8th grade in Chicago for 12 years. And when I found ASSISTments, very similar to Dawn, just never returned, just always loved using it in my classroom because of the data that I received. So excited to share more about ASSISTments with you today.
Great, thanks. And I'll turn it back to you in just a second, Carrie. Next, I want to introduce Amy. Amy, if you want to unmute and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Helmstetter, and I'm here with Jump Math to help out if you have any questions later, and then I'll kind of contribute to the conversation a little bit. But I'm Director of Sales at Jump Math, and to follow the same theme as Dawn and Carrie, I learned about Jump Math when I was a teacher. I was actually teaching 2nd and 3rd grade in my own classroom in California when I started using Jump Math, and used it for a couple of years before a position opened up at just the right time for me. And I've been working with Jump Math for 8 years now.
Great, thank you, Amy. All right, so again, any questions you have about ASSISTments related stuff, you've got me and Carrie on the chat to help you out, and anything more specific about the Jump Math curriculum, feel free to shout out to Amy in the chat. All right, so I'm going to turn it back to Carrie to do a little bit of introduction on what is ASSISTments.
Yeah. All right. So I'm happy to share what is ASSISTments. So if you're not familiar, it's a free formative assessment tool, and it's forever free. It integrates with both Google Classroom and Canvas if those are your learning management systems. As a teacher, it saves you a ton of time. Now, I know this is referencing our content library, but one of the things that you're going to hear about today is the data. And that was one of my favorite things, is how much data you get with ASSISTments that you can use to inform your instruction, and also help foster growth mindset in students because they get that like multiple attempts at each problem. So why ASSISTments? Like I said earlier, it really just gives students that regular and timely feedback as they're processing through the work, which increases their autonomy, right? Kids are engaged, the more ownership they have of their learning, and this is a great way to give them that ownership. For you as a teacher, it really just gives you such quick data when it comes to identifying students who need the most support, as well as students who are ready for a challenge. And you get that on a daily basis, so that you can use that to really target your instruction the very next day. If you don't believe me, ASSISTments is actually backed by research. It's one of 3 middle school math interventions with a tier 1 rating from Evidence for ESSA. It's also been in randomized control studies. And one of those randomized control studies found that there's 75% more learning in classrooms that use ASSISTments than classrooms that do not. I think that's really important as we think about unfinished learning, especially everything that's happened the past 2 years. And so John and I are one of 20,000 teachers that use ASSISTments because it has high quality practice problems and a library of content that you can choose from. It's also great when it comes to that data, right? You get actual data to inform your instruction in the moment. And so you can use that quickly to adjust and adapt to meet your students where they need. And then it also helps prevent student frustration because they get that feedback and you're being responsive to them in the classroom. So I'm going to pass it back to Dawn to talk to you a little bit about the teacher routine and how ASSISTments is an enhancement of that.
All right, thanks, Carrie. All right, so to take it back to our new user part 1, we started talking about the typical teacher routine just in your classroom every day. When assigning some independent practice, the teacher is always going to start by assigning. We call that step 1. And that could be in paper form. It could be through Google Classroom. It could be lots of different ways. Step 2 is that the student completes the assignment. Step 3, and fingers crossed on that one, I always did. Step 3 is that the teacher has to grade, score, assess the assignment, which is very time consuming, especially when you're on your couch at night watching TV with your red pen. And then step 4, the data that you get always informs your instruction. So the ASSISTments routine is just an enhancement, like Carrie said, of that regular teacher routine. So step 1 is that the teacher assigns from the online ASSISTments content library, which includes, you got it, jump math content. Step 2, as the student completes their assignment, they get immediate feedback as they work. So they're being told, you're right, you're wrong. They get multiple attempts. We'll get more into this in just a minute. Step 3, instead of scoring and grading all the work, the teacher uses time to analyze the data report so they can drive their instruction. And then step 4, which we're going to talk a lot about today, is the teacher then shares the data back with the students and uses it to take action. So let's just review step 1. So the content that we have available in the ASSISTments content library for Jump Math includes grades 3 through 8, unit quizzes and tests. There's also benchmark assessments from grades 3 through 8. And then in grades 6 through 8, we have some benchmark prep questions. All of these assignments are available to assign online through Google Classroom or Canvas. The student is going to get immediate feedback as they work. The teacher is going to get both class and student level data, which we'll talk about today. And all of these assignments are available to assign in practice mode or test mode. Practice mode is what I've been referring to with immediate feedback. Students get multiple attempts. If you're looking for more of a summative experience where you're just collecting student answers, and yes, they are auto-scored, you might want to assign in test mode. So you have 2 options when you're assigning. You can search by curriculum or you can search by standard. So let me just go live here just so you're not watching my slide deck the whole time. So once we log into ASSISTments, and just a reminder, you know you're logged in because you see your name appear in the upper right-hand corner. You can browse by content and simply open up the Jump Math folder, start clicking through folders, find the content that you want to assign. And then you have the option to assign all of the problems in that problem set, or just make a selection by clicking off the boxes. When you're ready to assign, oh, sorry, let me just get my Zoom window out of the way here. You can assign to class, and then you'll go through our assign time options. The other option of assigning is if you're looking for some additional practice problems aligned to a certain standard or just extra practice to remediate for a certain quiz or test or benchmark. Over here on the right, you can search by standard. So you can either start typing in a Common Core strand or start typing in a description of what you're looking for. And search by standard will search our entire ASSISTments content library and find problems aligned to that skill. And then you can click off problems you want and then assign to class. So those are the two choices to assign. So again, search by curriculum or search by standard. All right, just a quick recap. Again, if you missed part one, we definitely encourage you to go back, and that walks you through lots more information about assigning, and it walks you more through the student experience. But let's do a quick recap of what the student experience looks like in practice mode. So the student is going to access their work right through Google Classroom or Canvas. This is an interactive experience. So students are going to see one question at a time. They're going to type their answers in, getting immediate, instant feedback as they work. They'll be told, yes, you're correct, and they can move on. They will be told, no, try again, and they have unlimited attempts to try to persevere and get that correct answer. And if they genuinely get stuck, we do have a show answer button in practice mode where students will be shown the answer so that they can move on. And I'll address this again today, but you will be able to see on the report who had to press show answer so you can diagnose whether they are genuinely struggling or whether they might just be pressing that button for whatever reason. At the end of the assignment, students are going to see a student report where they can review the problems by clicking on these IDs on the left. This is the place that they will see any feedback left from open response questions, and they'll get to see their score in addition to their classmates' scores. All right, so I'm just going to pause here to see if anyone has any questions about step one, where the teacher assigns, or step two, the student experience. And I'm wondering if there's any questions from teachers who have gone home after part one, tried this out with their students. So I'm going to give just about 30 seconds or so just to see if anyone comes up with anything that I can show again. So I'll stop talking now. All right, you never know how long 30 seconds is until you have to sit there in silence, right? All right, please feel free to post any questions as we proceed with the presentation tonight. All right, so now we move on to step three, and we did a real quick summary of step three in part one, but I'm going to slow it down and give you more details today. So we're going to follow the framing of Cathryn, who is an 8th grade jump math teacher, and she's using ASSISTments for the first time. So maybe she watched new user part one and she's ready to kind of jump into the data. So let's consider what she needs to know in order to analyze the ASSISTments data that she has available to her. First, she needs a quick refresher on how to access the data. That is very important. So there's two ways for you to access data. So I'll go back over here live. First is right through your LMS. So whether you're in Canvas or Google Classroom, you're going to log in with your existing credentials and you're going to find the assignment that you want to access data for. Within Canvas and Google Classroom, you're going to see an ASSISTments link. When you click on that link in your verified teacher account, you'll be brought to the ASSISTments data report. So here's that. The other way to access ASSISTments report data is by going to your ASSISTments account, clicking on My Assignments on the left-hand side. You can then filter by the name of the class you're looking to find data for, the status, whether it's upcoming, released, or past due, and then you can sort by release or due date. Once you find the assignment you want to view data for, at a glance, you'll be able to see the number of students who completed the assignment out of the total, how many problems were in that problem set, any release or due date if you chose to set those, and then any standards that were aligned. Just a note that ASSISTments is currently in the process of tagging jump math questions with standards. So you may not see these filled out right now, but within the next couple months, we're expecting to have all jump problems tagged with standards. So that's something that you will see coming up. Once you're here, you can click View Report, and that is the second way that you can access ASSISTments data. So just to recap back here, first step is finding the data. So you can do that right through your LMS, logging in with your existing credentials. And just a note that when the students click on these links, they are not brought into the data report. They will be brought into their student experience. But since you're a teacher logging in, you will be brought to the data. The other way is, again, just logging into your ASSISTments account, clicking on My Assignments, doing any filters or sorting that you'd like, find the assignment and click on View Report. All right, so Cathryn now has access to her ASSISTments data report. Now she needs to understand how to analyze the data to understand what students need more support and with what concepts. So I'm going to go live again because that's more of a summary. So we'll start at the top of your data report. So you're always going to see the title. And just a note that this title right here looks a little long. You have the ability to change that title to something shorter or something that more meets your needs during the assigning process. Up at the top, we have the problems view and the standards view. Standards view I'll come back to in a minute. And up here, we have the progress cards. The progress cards are going to tell you how many students have not started the assignment, how many are in progress and when they last worked on the assignment, and then how many were completed and when they completed the assignment. So at a glance, you can kind of see where students are in the process of completing the assignment. If I move down a little, I see the performance summary. So at a glance, a teacher can see on each one of the problems, which is these blue titles, the number of students who got the problem correct on the first attempt, got it correct eventually on the second try, third try, really unlimited tries. And then the pink right here represents students who got it incorrect. In other words, they had to press the show answer button. I can also do a little filter. So if I want to highlight the correct, the number of correct students or the number of students who press show answer, I can do that just by clicking on these bubbles. All right, moving down, we have the detailed report. So this is going to give you the meat of how students performed on each question and how each student performed individually. So starting up here in the upper left, we have the average score for the entire assignment. As I look down each one of these columns, this represents a different question. So we have question 1, part A, question 1, part B, problem 2, part A, part B, etc. I get to see the average, the problem average for that particular question. Moving down, if there was any common wrong answers for a particular problem, those are going to be highlighted here as well. So there was no common wrong answers for part A and B. For the second question, there was a common wrong answer of 9, and the percentage tells you the percentage of wrong answers that gave this answer. As I move over to the right, if there was any hints embedded in those problems, I would see those here, and then total time spent on the assignment. When I look at each one of the rows, this represents a different student. And I'm just going to unhide the student names here just so you can see that. So different students moving down the rows, we get to see the score for that particular student. And then as I move to the right, this tells me the student score on each question. If I click on each one of these score chips, I can see the student score, what the correct answers were, and what each student attempt was. So for this orange one, this tells me that they did not get it right on the first try. Their first attempt was 1, their second attempt was 3/7, and they got it right. All right, moving down here, let's see, just looking at my my notes. So next to each one of these score chips, we see some X's and triangles. So the X's and triangles are telling you as the teacher if the student had an incorrect attempt or whether they used a hint. Right up here next to the letter I is our scoring guide. So this is going to tell you what all the different colors mean. The X represents an incorrect answer, and the triangle indicates that the student used a hint. Just a note that not all problem sets have embedded hints. Some teachers who are part of one of our programs may have written their own hints, but Jump Math currently does not have a whole bunch of hints. So you probably will not see triangles on your report. All right, any questions coming up in the chat yet?
Nope.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's a lot of information here, so I want to make sure I'm pausing and giving a chance for questions. Moving right along, there are questions in the JUMP curriculum that ask the student to draw a picture of something or give an explanation or show their work. And that's our open response questions. If there's an open response questions, you're going to see the word assess here in this column. Okay. You have the option to score and leave feedback to your students based on their open response work, which are not automatically scored. So when I click on the word assess, that's going to open up the open response scoring window. So here you're going to be able to see all of the students' work for that one particular question. And up here at the top, you don't have to memorize the question. I can see what the problem is and then look at student work. You can score on a 4-point scale, which will carry back over to the report as a percentage and factor into the student's score. You can also leave feedback for that student, which you'll have to let them know that you left feedback in your LMS so that they can go back in and see the feedback that you took your time for. One other thing that I love about the open response scoring is if you're looking to highlight student work, over here in the last column, we see custom sort. So if there is some student work that you really want to highlight and be able to show to the class, you can number those and then custom sort, and those are going to come up to the top. So you can hide the comments column, hide the student names, hide any columns that you don't want, and then show the students a snapshot. You might say, what's wrong with this answer? Who loves something about this answer? And just have a discussion with your class about different ways to approach different problems. All right, coming back here, a couple more things that I want to highlight. One is if you click on the triple dot to the right of a student name, you have the ability to delete student progress. You may want to do this if you notice a student rush through their assignment and you may want to give them another shot. Maybe you've done some reteaching with a student, and again, you want to give them another opportunity to show mastery. What that's going to do is wipe out all of the student responses, and when they click back into the assignment, they'll have a fresh start. The last thing I'm going to show you here before we go over to the standards view is the student details report. Maybe we're looking at this student here who looks like they really struggled on these 3 problems. If we click on their name, the student details report will open. This is literally a play-by-play for what that student did. So we get to see how much, or when they started the assignment, how much time they spent in between each response, whether they got the answer correct, whether they got it incorrect, when they had to show, press show answer. And it kind of gives you a little insight into what the student was doing as they were completing the assignment. This is one of the other places as well that you can do some scoring. So I think about this view right here as kind of the grading worksheet style. So you see all the students' open response work in one place, and you can just navigate from one student to another, or you can score it the other way I showed you by clicking assess. All right, so just a reminder, if you do go ahead and score open response, that score will carry over as a percentage, and it will now be factored into that student score. All right, last thing I want to talk about before I give you a little bit of time to just play around and look at the report is the standards view. So if I click on the standards view, assuming that the questions in the problem set are tagged by skill, which Jump Math will be in the next couple months, I promise, this is going to tell you what standards are present in the problem set you assigned, how many questions aligned to that standard there are, and then how the student scored on that standard. So if you're a standards-based grader, this may be something that you want to address, whereas the problems view kind of allows you to dig into the problem level, where this kind of just highlights the standards level. All right. So a lot of information there. So I'm just going to come back and do a quick summary, and then we're going to share a link with you just so you can play around and navigate through the report and ask any questions. So on the assignment report, we start with the lesson title, the student progress cards, performance summary, detailed report, and then all of the student details are down here at the bottom. The progress cards tell you how many students have not started, how many in progress, and how many completed, along with timestamps. The performance summary gives you bar graphs that give you a summary of student performance on each one of the problems. The detailed report down at the bottom gives you details about how each student performed on each question. And this is where you're going to find delete progress if you're looking to give students another opportunity. The scoring key you can always find by clicking on the I and the word scoring. So that'll give you the breakdown of what the different colors and the symbols mean on the report. But in general, the green indicates the student got it right on the first attempt. The pink indicates they had to press show answer, and the green with all the symbols tells us they got it correct eventually without having to access the answer. The problem details, I seem to always forget that. I'm sorry, I'm going to come back and show you problem details. So 2 ways that you can access problem details, and they're both by clicking on the blue problem title. So when you click on these, a bar on the right will open up, and it's going to give you a summary of that problem. You'll get to review the problem here, any aligned standards. As I move down, here's your answer key, so you can see the correct answers. And another score breakdown. So we can see it as the circle graph, or we can see it as the bar graph here. You can also expand this window if you're sharing this on a smartboard or any other way with your students. And you can also navigate through problems by clicking on next or previous. All right, so back over here, exactly what I just said. By clicking on the blue problem titles, you'll be able to access the problem, any accepted answers, the correct answers, and then the student score breakdown. The student details report is the play-by-play to see how students were thinking as they were completing their assignment. That can be accessed by clicking on the student's name. And then you have the option to score and leave feedback on open response questions. This is optional. Just to note that if you are just using those student responses to engage in discussion with your students, you don't have to go in there and score. You don't have to go and leave feedback. You may just want to assess student thinking, or you may want to share it out on your projector and have a discussion. All right. And last but not least, the standards report, which highlights the standards that were present in the problem set, the number of problems aligned to that standard, and then the score for each individual student. All right, so Carrie is going to put a link in the chat, and we're going to give you about 3 minutes just to play around with the data and look at it, dig in a little bit and see if you have any questions. So that chat, that link in the chat is going to bring you to, it's not a live report, but Carrie did a great job making this as interactive as possible. Thank you, Carrie. So anything that's circled in blue is actually going to pop you to a new window, just so you can see how the assignment report will behave when you do have a live report to look at. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes or so and put myself on mute. Please feel free to post any questions. Carrie will raise those as they come up, and then we will move on to look at some scenarios of how you can use data in your classroom. Okay, just about one more minute. Feel free to ask any questions, ask any noticings or wonderings in the chat. Sorry, I was on mute. Carrie, any questions coming in that I can help to answer?
No questions yet.
All right, thanks, Carrie.
Sorry. Do students get 50% for trying until they get it right, no matter how many times?
Great question. Great question. So students are going to, when they are, let me just get out of here. If a student gets it right on the first attempt, they're going to get 100%. If a student gets it wrong once, they drop down to 67. If they have it incorrect twice, down to 33, and then they go down to 0. So you can tell just by looking at that number in the score chip how many attempts they took until it gets to 0. Students have unlimited opportunities to try, so they might try 15 times to get the correct answer, which is not ideal, but they do have that ability. Just a note that we don't endorse necessarily using these scores as grades if you're giving the assignment formatively, because formative assessments are intended to support student learning, and we do want them to try and try again so we can understand their thinking. If you're giving this as a summative assessment, that may look a little bit different, but we definitely encourage you to communicate however you're using the scores with your students. And then over here, I can see there's a follow-up question about the standards report. So for the standards report, it is going to be marked correct or incorrect. So you can see that this right here, there was 2 questions. So students got 1 right, and I'm sorry, they are factored in first, second, and third try. And Carrie, I think we have a resource on the standards report that you might be able to share in the chat, just to clarify this for I think that's Amy. All right. Please feel free to post any other questions, and Carrie will try to find that and post it in the chat as we continue. All right, so some getting started suggestions. We talked about a lot of elements of the report, and there are 4 elements of the report that we really recommend you start with if you're feeling a little overwhelmed. So first is the class average. The class average is going to help you quickly assess whole class understanding on the assignment. The problem average, which is each one of the columns, identifies individual problems that need whole class review. I remember when I used to go over homework, I would say, who needs help on question 1? Who didn't understand question 2? And there was like crickets with my 8th graders. So this really gives you that power of data so you know how to spend your time at the beginning of class. Common wrong answers will help you to facilitate whole class discussions around common misconceptions. And then lastly, the individual student score, either by problem or by standard, helps you to identify what students need a little small group reviewing or reteaching. All right, and I'm not seeing any other questions come in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. And Carrie found that resource. So if you're looking for the resource on the reports, that is in the chat. So now we're going to check back in with Cathryn, and Cathryn is now confident that she can effectively and efficiently analyze the assessments data. So now she has to know what she's going to do with that data, how to use the data to inform instruction and to discuss the data with her students. So I'm going to show you, this video is just about 3 minutes and we do have time for it today. And it's basically just a giant success story, which really resembles my experience. I'm sure the same for Carrie, from an assessments teacher that we work with. So I'm going to go ahead and play now.
I'm Kim Kelly. I'm a 7th grade math teacher at Skyview Middle School. I feel like homework is a very important instructional practice, but it's very frustrating trying to figure out how to collect it, how to assess it, how to provide that feedback to the students. Before assessments, I would actually start class with get out your homework and let's check it. And we wouldn't even start any math until 10 minutes into class.
Here's what I need for you to do. You're going to get out your homework from yesterday and you are going to check your answers. Where's your homework? You don't have it, okay? Are you done checking? Boys, are you done checking? Okay, does anyone have any questions? Any of them that you want me to go over with you? 160 what? Centimeters. How'd we do? Feel pretty good about them?
With assessments, my homework procedures can be far more efficient. I can dive right into the common misconceptions, where the errors are. I know where we're struggling better than they do.
68% class average. This is the question we just looked at. The other question that was not so hot, 43% correct.
The burden of finding the starting point is off of me, it's off of the students. We can rely on the data to help us identify the starting points for our discussion. I can launch my class with a common wrong answer or a problem where I identified a weakness. Every step of my lesson is driven in a meaningful way.
Is this line right here part of the perimeter? Yeah, so we need to fill it in and add that one too. That was first common mistake. Forgetting to add in those two sides.
It benefits the students, but just as much it benefits the teachers. I'm able to identify the common misconceptions, which allows me to steer my instruction quickly to support my student learning.
And there's my correct answer, okay? So most of us were pretty close. Just a couple little common misconceptions that we were able to fix. Good?
Once you start using assessments, the students have immediate feedback, so they're learning while they're doing their homework. And then as the teacher using that data to drive the homework review process, you spend so much less time going over the homework that the bulk of your classroom time now can be spent on the new instruction. Plus, all of the students are invested. The conversation is around common misconceptions. It doesn't matter if they completed their homework or they don't have it with them, they can participate in the class. There are so many different options available, but I want to be sure that what I'm investing my time in is research-based and proven to improve student instruction. And I can see with my own students a difference in their learning. It has actually changed my class.
All right, thanks for watching that with me. So now we're going to dive into, like Kim Kelly said, how we're going to use the data with students. So we're going to walk through 3 scenarios together. The first one, I'm going to kind of think aloud for you. The second one will ask for some participation, and then the third as well. So we'd love for you to hear from you in the chat as we go through these scenarios. And Amy's going to jump in and give a little bit of guidance on how you can use some of the JUMP resources to drive your instruction as well. So scenario 1, after teaching scale drawings in lessons G7-8 through G7-10 in part 1, unit 6 of JUMP Math, Cathryn assigned the associated quiz to her students. That evening, she reviewed the resulting assignment report to help plan for her lesson the next day, hopefully being very efficient with that data. So I'm going to give you just about 20 seconds or so just to have a look at this data. And then again, I'll think aloud and kind of walk through what you could do with this. All right, so let's see what pieces stuck out. One thing I noticed is that one student had several of these pink bubbles or pink chips, which indicated that they requested the answer to this problem. They had an average score of 5%. And then over on the right, I can see that they only spent 33 seconds on the assignment, especially compared to the other students in the class. That seems very low. So a conclusion that I can draw from this snapshot of data is that this student either needs more support to master proportional relationships, or they game the assignment by pressing show answer without making any thoughtful attempts. I know that I had students who met both of these scenarios. So how do we figure out which one of these scenarios represents student one? Well, we could look at the student details report. Remember, this is the report that you access by clicking on the student name, and it's a play-by-play for that student. You could review this data with the student in a one-on-one conference. Sometimes just showing the students what data you have access to is enough to kind of get them back into shape. Given that this student spent very little time on each question and requested a lot of hints, they clearly did not make the best effort. So again, you can see here, they spent 3 seconds, requested a hint, 1 additional second, requested a hint, etc. So you can meet with this student to reteach and then delete progress and have them give it another attempt. Amy, I'll turn it over to you here.
Hi, yes. So let's say we're looking and we see that there are some common mistakes. One thing I wanted to point out that's Jump Math specific is that the actual quizzes and tests are named in assessments and on the hard copy by their lesson numbers that they refer to. So if you see that somebody's not doing so well on Unit 6 geometry quiz, this particular quiz tells you which lessons, you can see with the little arrow there, it's telling you which lessons to review, basically. So you can go back and find those lesson plans, and that's kind of on this slide too, over to the side here. You can find those lesson plans and look for ways that it was taught, because you might have to reteach some of that. You can identify which students are struggling with which questions, and reteach those key skills or concepts from the lesson plans, and then maybe reassign those exercises from the quizzes and tests.
All right, thanks, Amy. And just a reminder too, that you can search by standard. All of these lesson plans say the aligned standards, and you could even create your own problem set with some problems they haven't seen before.
And that's a new one too. Yeah, for maybe for some homework pages, because our homework pages at Jump Math they're not in assessments. So that's something you might find is, you know, which standards you're working on, because our lesson plans will tell you right away. So maybe you'll find some questions that you want to assign from assessments for homework or something.
Thanks, Amy. All right, so scenario number 2. Sorry, I'm just going to refresh my page real quick. I just made a change. All right. Oh, here we go. All right, so scenario number 2. So Cathryn had her students complete the Jump Math Part 1, Unit 3 unit test on equivalent expressions. She wants to quickly assess whole class understanding so she can efficiently review the next day in class. So here's another snapshot of data. So I'm going to give you again about 30 seconds, and then we're going to do a little poll in the chat to see if you have the correct understanding of what this data is showing us. All right, so I'm going to give you some choices in just a minute. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Which of the following noticings are accurate about this data? And I'll go back in just a minute. Which of the following noticings are accurate? Most students scored poorly on all questions. some students scored poorly on all questions, or most students scored poorly on 2 questions. So let me just go back. Sorry, I had a poll and it somehow disappeared. So this could have been easier. So again, we have most students scored poorly on all questions. Some students scored poorly on all questions, and most students scored poorly on 2 questions.
Feel free to type into the chat. Hopefully we can get a bunch of responses. Check in. I'm seeing C come up quite a bit.
Oh, and thank you, everyone. I know it's hard to flip back and forth. We had a poll and it disappeared. So absolutely correct. So let's see. So we had most students scored poorly on 2 questions. So if we were reviewing this test, we know that we would only have to be going over problem 4 and problem 5. Right? Because we had 100% on question 1, 96%, and depending on your threshold, 73% may be something you want to review as well. So next is, which conclusions can you draw? And I apologize, I'm going to flip back and forth again, but which conclusions can we draw here for problem 4? So 67% of students entered the wrong answer of 1/3. 1/3 of students entered the wrong answer of 67, or 67% of students who entered a wrong answer put 1/3.
I went ahead and put the questions in the chat as well.
Thank you, Carrie. That would be much better.
I was like, you can go back to the data. That way you can look at the data and then see the questions as well.
Thank you. All right, so I'll give you about 20 seconds or so just to read through these. This is like a common mistake people made when they're reading the data. So I'd love to be able to just clarify this for anyone who needs it. All right, about 10 more seconds. We'd love to see your answers in the chat. All right, Carrie, looks like people are stumped here. You want to go ahead and reveal the correct answer?
Yes. So with common wrong answers, it's a little tricky. It would say of the students who got it incorrect. So 67% of them answered 1/3. So I think that's the last one. 67% of the students who entered a wrong answer were put 1/3. So their initial response, like their initial reaction for students who got it incorrect, was 1/3. And that's where that discussion comes into play and becomes really fun in class, because everyone, their initial response showing that like common wrong answer, and 67% majority of the class who got it wrong put that. So that becomes the discussion point that I loved to do in class the next day. So that was like my go-to warm up if there was ever a common wrong answer.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes if we look at problem 3, you may see some you know, a problem that didn't score too terribly. You know, 73 isn't a horrible score, but you still see that there's a common misconception for those students who did get it wrong. So it's definitely something either to address as a class. In this case, there was a lot of students who did poorly on this versus a smaller sample of students, but there was still a common misconception that needs to be addressed. All right, thanks, Carrie. All right, so I'm going to move forward here. So what could you do with this information? We already talked about this a little bit, but you could start class by reviewing those 2 low scoring problems, paying particular attention to why those common wrong answers happened. And then you could review and then assign questions from previous quizzes or give students more practice before reassigning the test. I think as teachers, we really like to make sure students reach mastery. So you can do that by reassigning the same topic or finding other questions aligned to that standard to assign, just like in the last scenario. And Amy, we got something here for you.
Hi, yes. So this scenario is very similar to the other one I spoke about. Let's say that your students didn't do so well on the unit tests. If they don't do so well on the unit tests, one idea might be to go to the quizzes from that unit and reassign some of those questions for them to practice, or to perhaps go over some of the quiz tests from that unit that they didn't do so well on.
Yeah, and once we get these standards, these tagged by standards, it's going to be a lot easier to find those
Oh,
questions.
I know. I'm so excited about that, because now too, you can, even if you, I know some of you guys out there are not going to be able to use assessments every day, or I mean, I know that that's a lot of times can help you use assessments, but if you can't use them every day, it will be nice to just go into assessments and see which standards your quizzes and tests are assessing, even if you have to give at least some of the students the paper version.
All right. And scenario 3. So scenario 3 is Cathryn assigned the Jump Math grade 8 benchmark, assessment A. So again, we have benchmark prep questions in 6 through 8, and then we have the benchmarks in grade 3 through 8. She wants to see how her students were doing cumulatively after part 1, unit 5. So her mastery threshold for the assignment is a score of 70%. So we only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to rush through this a little bit, but I'd love to know in the chat both what you notice about this data and what conclusions you can draw from this snapshot of data. Anything you notice and any conclusions you could draw, and then I'll take you out with the next steps. I love this comment. There's quite a wide range of mastery on this benchmark. Absolutely. And we're going to see that a lot in classes, right? Just to note that this report was sorted from high to low, which is something you can do to help to assess and see what students need more support and what students have mastered the concept. And then one more, 4 students didn't meet the threshold and may need remediation. Absolutely. So again, sorting is going to be able to allow you to draw a line and say these students don't need any more support and these students may need more support. All right, so 50% of the students did receive a score lower than 70% on the benchmark, definitely a noticing. And a subgroup of those 4 students may need more support on the topics covered on that benchmark test before moving forward to new content. So I'm going to skip right through that. So just one next step that you could take based on this is if you use math centers in your classroom, you could pull those 4 students, again, do some reteaching, give them some extra practice, delete progress, and allow them to retry and demonstrate their mastery, whatever way makes most sense to you. All right, so recommended use in the last few minutes. We recommend that you use ASSISTments data to guide your instruction at least 75% of the time. And we absolutely encourage you to share the data with your students, how that data is driving your instruction, what changes that you're making based on that. Like Carrie said earlier in the presentation, that's going to allow them to buy in if they can clearly see that you're using their data to meet their needs. All right, so I'm going to move on and see if I can wrap up in 3 minutes. I think I can, everybody. So today we talked mostly about step 3, analyzing ASSISTments data, and step 4, using that data to inform instruction and discuss with students. Carrie's going to put a link in the chat, which is a short feedback survey. All of our webinars are free, and we host this JUMP content for free as well on the ASSISTments platform. So any feedback that you have is super helpful to make sure we're supporting all of our users. While you're doing that or leaving it open on the side to do after, we do have some upcoming webinars on the ASSISTments end. If you're looking to learn more about skill builders, which are our mastery practice sets that are aligned to skills, that's on October 21st at 5 p.m. Eastern time. It's a 30-minute session, quick session, just to learn a little bit more about the skill builders and the reports. And then at the end of the month, we have our targeted webinar, our first of the season, using ASSISTments to address unfinished learning. At this webinar, you'll hear from ASSISTments teachers sharing their stories, how they use ASSISTments in their own classrooms to address unfinished learning during this school year. On our website, you'll find our help center where you'll find our user resources, both for teachers, students, and parents, our FAQ section, our webinar library, and our upcoming webinar sign up. So we encourage you to go there if you're looking for any support, but you can always email us at contact@assistments.org as well if you run into any problems or just have any questions about implementing assessments in your classroom. Another place that you can go to ask questions is our Facebook user community, which I'm sure Carrie is going to share in the chat in a minute. Carrie posts all sorts of helpful videos and questions and prompts and stuff in that Facebook page. So that's a great place to go just to get ideas of how to use assessments in your class. We're also on Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. All right, so given that we have 1 minute left, I'm going to finish up with our thank you slide. Again, any questions that you have about assessments, you can always reach out to us at contact@assistments.org. If you have any questions about Jump Math and getting support from their team, you can email Amy at the email address shown here. Once again, everyone who participated and registered for today's session will get an email with the recording and the slide deck from today, so you can review that, share with colleagues, whatever you need to do. So thank you to Amy for joining us from Jump Math. And thank you for everyone who joined us today, whether it is afternoon or evening. I hope we hear from you again soon, and enjoy using assessments with your Jump Math curriculum.